If you grew up in church, you probably heard some version of this. The Bible was written by God through inspired men. And that's true from a theological perspective. But here's the question most people never ask. Who were those men? Because the Bible wasn't written by one person in one sitting. It was composed over 1,500 years by dozens of authors across multiple continents, languages, and cultures. And some of those authors? We have no idea who they were. Let's break down who actually put ink to parchment and why it's way more complicated than Sunday school made it sound. The Old Testament wasn't written as a single project. It's a collection of texts written over roughly 1,000 years. Take the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Tradition says Moses wrote them. But modern scholars point out something interesting. These books describe Moses' death. Moses didn't write his own obituary. Most biblical scholars today believe the Torah was compiled by multiple authors over centuries, drawing from oral traditions, legal codes, and historical records. That doesn't make it less sacred. It makes it more complex. Then there's the Book of Psalms. Many are attributed to King David, and some probably were written by him, but others were clearly written centuries later, during Israel's exile in Babylon. David didn't write those. The Book of Isaiah? Scholars believe it had at least 2 authors, maybe 3, writing in different time periods. Same name, different hands. The Book of Job? Author unknown. Ecclesiastes? Traditionally attributed to Solomon, but the language suggests it was written centuries after his death. The Old Testament is an anthology, written by priests, prophets, kings, poets, and scribes whose names we'll never fully know. The New Testament is more straightforward, but still surprising. The 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, are named after their attributed authors. But here's the thing, none of them signed their work. The titles Gospel according to Matthew were added later by early church leaders trying to organize the texts. Most scholars believe Mark was likely written first, possibly by John Mark, a companion of Peter. Matthew and Luke borrowed heavily from Mark and another lost source scholars call Q. John was written much later and reads completely differently. Were they written by the people whose names are attached? Maybe, maybe not. We don't have the originals to verify. Then there are Paul's letters: Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, and others. Paul definitely wrote some of them, but scholars debate whether he wrote all of them. Some letters attributed to Paul use vocabulary and theology that don't match his earlier writings, which suggests disciples of Paul may have written letters in his name after his death, a common practice in the ancient world called pseudepigraphy. Not forgery, just a way of honoring a teacher's legacy. The Book of Hebrews? Traditionally attributed to Paul, but even early church fathers admitted they didn't know who wrote it. Revelation? Written by John, but which John? John the Apostle? A different John? We don't know for sure. Does any of this undermine the Bible's authority? That depends on what you believe authority means. If you believe the Bible is divinely inspired, then the human authors are instruments, and their identities matter less than the message. If you approach it as a historical document, then knowing the authors, their contexts, and their audiences helps you understand what they meant. Either way, here's the truth. The Bible wasn't written by one voice. It was written by farmers and kings, by exiles and priests, by people who witnessed miracles and people who recorded traditions passed down for generations. Some we know by name, some we'll never know. But together, they created the most influential collection of texts in human history. And whether you see it as scripture or literature or both, that's a story worth understanding.